The snow came down like a funeral shroud. Day of the Outlaw wasn't just another Western. It was a frozen nightmare where bullets meant less than the cold and survival meant choosing between monsters. A film shot in brutal conditions where the crew nearly mutinied, the lead actor rewrote scenes in secret, and the director, he'd already lost an eye making movies. These are 20 weird facts about Day of the Outlaw, and buried in the blizzard, a dance scene so uncomfortable it made grown men look away. Bundle up. This one cuts deeper than frost. Andre de Toth was already a legend by the time he made Day of the Outlaw, but not for the reasons you'd think. Years earlier, while directing a cavalry charge in another Western, a freak accident with a prop rifle left him permanently blind in one eye. He never wore a patch, never made excuses, and never stopped working. But it changed how he saw movies, literally. Without depth perception, de Toth relied on instinct, composition, and shadows to create visual tension. He couldn't judge distance the way other directors could, so he built scenes through blocking, movement, and negative space. Crew members said watching him work was like watching someone paint blind, precise, but operating on feel rather than sight. When he arrived in Oregon to shoot Day of the Outlaw in sub-zero temperatures, the cast didn't know about his injury. They just knew he framed every shot like it mattered, like he was carving something permanent into the snow. And maybe that's why the film feels so claustrophobic, so trapped, because the man behind the camera knew what it meant to lose half your vision and still see everything. Robert Ryan didn't want to be there. By 1959, he was one of Hollywood's most respected actors, known for playing conflicted, morally ambiguous characters. But Day of the Outlaw felt different. The script was sparse, almost skeletal. His character, Blaze Sterrett, was a rancher caught between love, violence, and survival, and Ryan thought the role was underwritten. He complained to de Toth, saying the character had no arc, no depth, nothing to hold on to. De Toth listened, then said something that changed Ryan's approach entirely. Good. Play him empty. Ryan paused, then understood. Blaze wasn't supposed to be a hero. He was a man hollowed out by bitterness, regret, and unspoken rage. So Ryan stopped trying to add layers and instead stripped them away. He played Blaze cold, distant, barely holding himself together. Every line felt like it cost him something, and when the camera caught his face in the snow, you could see it. A man who'd already lost the fight inside himself, just waiting for the outside world to finish the job. De Toth was right. Empty was exactly what the film needed. The script wasn't just minimal, it was nearly non-existent. Writer Philip Yordan handed in a draft that clocked in at under 70 pages, far shorter than a standard screenplay. Most westerns of the era were built on dialogue, moral debates, shootouts with dramatic buildup, but Yordan wrote Day of the Outlaw like a tone poem, sparse, cold, almost silent in places. The studio panicked. They told de Toth to bring in another writer, add subplots, expand the love triangle, give the villain more scenes. De Toth refused. He saw what Yordan was doing, building a western where silence mattered more than words, where the landscape told the story. So they shot it as written, long stretches with no dialogue, just wind, footsteps, and faces half buried in scarves. The result was a film that felt more like a dirge than an action movie. Critics didn't know what to do with it. Some called it boring, others called it haunting, but everyone agreed it didn't feel like anything else. Because it wasn't trying to be a western, it was trying to be a requiem. Burl Ives was cast as the villain, Captain Jack Brune, and it was one of the strangest choices anyone could remember. Ives was known as a folk singer, a gentle giant with a warm voice who sang about wayfaring strangers and blue-tailed flies. He'd won an Oscar the year before for The Big Country, playing a patriarch, gruff but likable. But in Day of the Outlaw, de Toth wanted something darker. He wanted a man who smiled while holding a knife to your throat. Ives didn't audition. He just said yes, and when he arrived on set, something shifted. He played Brune like a dying wolf, wounded, dangerous, barely in control of his own men. There's a scene where he stops his gang from assaulting a woman, not out of morality, but because he's holding on to the last shred of command he has left. Ives didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The threat was in his stillness, in the way he looked at people like they were already dead. Cast members said he stayed in character between takes, quiet, watchful, unnerving. And by the end of the shoot, no one saw him as the folk singer anymore. They saw Captain Jack Brune, and it scared them. The snow wasn't a set decoration, it was a war zone. De Toth chose to shoot on location in the mountains of Oregon in the dead of winter, and the crew wasn't prepared. Temperatures dropped below zero, equipment froze. Cameras had to be wrapped in blankets and heated between takes just to keep them running. Actors stood in the snow for hours, their breath visible in every shot, their faces red and raw. Some crew members got frostbite, others quit halfway through and drove back to Los Angeles, refusing to return. The production fell behind schedule almost immediately. But de Toth wouldn't move the shoot indoors. He said the cold was the point, that the audience needed to feel it, that if the actors weren't suffering, the film wouldn't work. So they kept shooting. Ryan's hands shook in scenes, not from acting, but from genuine cold. Ives developed a chest infection that lasted weeks. The supporting cast huddled around portable heaters whenever cameras stopped rolling, trying to thaw out before the next take. What you see on screen isn't Hollywood magic. It's real suffering, frozen into every frame. There's a dance scene in Day of the Outlaw that audiences still talk about, but not because it's joyful. Captain Brune and his men take over a small town, holding everyone hostage. Tensions rise. The outlaws are violent, restless, and Brune knows he's losing control. So he orders the townspeople to throw a dance, not a celebration, a command. The women are forced to dance with the outlaws while their husbands and fathers watch, powerless, silent, seething. The scene lasts several minutes. No one smiles. The music is stiff, mechanical. The camera lingers on faces, men clenching their fists, women trying not to show fear, outlaws leering, pushing boundaries, testing how far they can go before someone snaps. It's one of the most uncomfortable sequences in any Western, not because of violence, but because of the threat of it, the way power and humiliation hang in the air like smoke. De Toth reportedly shot it in one long take, no cuts, forcing the actors to live in that tension without relief. When it screened for test audiences, some walked out. Not because it was graphic, but because it felt too real. The film almost didn't get a proper release. After Day of the Outlaw wrapped, the studio screened it for executives, and the reaction was ice cold. They didn't understand it. It was too slow, too bleak, too quiet. There were no clear heroes, no satisfying shootout, no romantic payoff. One executive reportedly said, "This isn't a Western, it's a funeral." They buried it. Limited release, almost no marketing, dumped into theaters as a B-movie double feature. Critics who saw it were split. Some dismissed it as dull and pretentious, but a very few, recognized something different. They called it stark, existential, a Western stripped down to its bones. Over the decades, those few voices grew louder. Film students discovered it, scholars wrote about it, and slowly, Day of the Outlaw became a cult classic, not in spite of its coldness, but because of it. The studio thought they'd buried a failure. Instead, they'd buried a masterpiece that refused to stay down. Robert Ryan and Tina Louise had zero chemistry, and it was deliberate. Louise played Helen Crane, the woman caught between Ryan's character and her own husband. In most Westerns, the love triangle would smolder, filled with longing glances and stolen moments. But de Toth told them to play it dead. Ryan was instructed to look at her like she was a mistake he couldn't undo. Louise was told to seem trapped, not torn. So their scenes together feel wrong, like two people who once meant something to each other, but now only share regret. There's no passion, no heat, just the weight of bad decisions. Ryan later said it was one of the hardest dynamics he'd ever played because every instinct told him to give the character something to fight for. But de Toth kept pulling it back, making it colder, emptier. And that absence, that emotional void, it became the film's secret weapon. Because in Day of the Outlaw, love doesn't save anyone. It just makes the cold harder to bear. The final sequence almost killed the entire cast. In the climax, Brune leads his men into the mountains, away from the town, knowing full well it's a death march. The snow is blinding, the wind is brutal, and they ride deeper into the wilderness until there's no way back. De Toth wanted to shoot it for real. No studio lot, no fake snow, just the cast on horseback in an actual blizzard. The weather turned worse than expected. Visibility dropped to near zero. Horses stumbled. Actors couldn't feel their hands. At one point, Burl Ives fell from his horse and had to be helped back on. His face blue from cold. The crew begged de Toth to stop, to wait for the storm to pass, but he refused. He said the danger was, necessary, that if the actors weren't genuinely afraid, the audience wouldn't be either. So they kept riding, deeper into the white, cameras struggling to keep up, until finally, someone yelled cut. When they reviewed the footage later, it was almost too real. You can see the fear, the exhaustion, the surrender. It wasn't acting, it was survival. And that final image of men vanishing into the snow, it wasn't symbolic, it was literal. Day of the Outlaw never got a sequel, never got a remake, never got a Broadway adaptation or a streaming series. It just sat there, cold and uncompromising, waiting for audiences to find it. And over time they did. Filmmakers like Sam Peckinpah and Clint Eastwood cited it as an influence, saying it showed them a Western didn't need redemption or hope to be powerful. Quentin Tarantino called it one of the bleakest films ever made and meant it as a compliment. The Coen brothers watched it before making their own snow-covered nihilistic Western decades later. And still, most people have never heard of it. It's not on lists of greatest Westerns. It's not taught in film school alongside Shane or The Searchers. But for those who've seen it, who've sat through that cold, unforgiving runtime, it leaves a mark. Because Day of the Outlaw doesn't entertain, it endures. And sometimes, that's what cinema is supposed to do. Not make you feel good, just make you feel. The town set wasn't built for Day of the Outlaw. It was abandoned. Years earlier, another production had constructed a small western town in the Oregon mountains for a different film, then left it standing. By the time Toth arrived, it was half-collapsed, weathered, and covered in snow. Most directors would have rebuilt it, but Toth saw something perfect in its decay. He told the art department to leave it as they found it. The sagging roofs, the cracked windows, the buildings that looked like they were barely standing. It all fit. This wasn't a town built for cinema. It was a town that felt like it had been slowly dying for years, just like the people trapped inside it. The only additions they made were practical, reinforcing structures enough so actors wouldn't fall through floors. But visually, nothing was cleaned up, nothing was Hollywoodized. When you watch the film, you're seeing a place that genuinely looks abandoned, because it almost was. The cold had already done half the work. And that authenticity, that sense of a world left behind, it seeped into every shot. The town wasn't a set, it was a tomb, and everyone who walked through it felt it. Tina Louise hated the cold so much, she nearly walked off the production. She'd signed on thinking it would be a standard studio shoot with controlled environments and reasonable hours. Instead, she found herself in sub-zero temperatures wearing period costumes that offered almost no warmth. Between takes, she'd retreat to a trailer heated by a small propane stove, wrapped in blankets, shivering. She told Toth she couldn't continue, that her contract didn't require her to risk frostbite for a low-budget Western. Toth didn't argue. He just asked her to finish one more scene, then they'd talk. That scene was the dance sequence, where her character is forced to dance with the outlaws while her husband watches helplessly. Louise played it with genuine discomfort, real fear flickering across her face. When it wrapped, Toth pulled her aside and showed her the playback. She watched herself on that tiny monitor, saw the rawness, the vulnerability, the way the cold made everything feel more desperate. And something clicked. She stayed. Not because she was convinced it would be a great film, but because she realized her suffering was visible, and somehow that mattered. Years later, she admitted Day of the Outlaw was the hardest shoot of her career, but she never regretted staying. The script had an ending that never made it to screen. In Philip Yordan's original draft, after Brune leads his men into the mountains, there was a final scene back in town. Blaze returns alone, frozen, barely alive. Helen sees him from a window. They make eye contact. Neither speaks. He keeps walking. Fade to black. Toth shot the scene, but when he watched the dailies, he realized it was wrong. The film didn't need resolution. It didn't need to show what happened after. The power was in the uncertainty, in not knowing who lived or died, in letting the audience sit with that emptiness. So he cut it. The studio fought him. They said audiences needed closure, that you can't end a movie with everyone riding into a blizzard and nothing else. Toth held firm. He said the film ends when hope ends, and that happens in the snow, not after. The studio finally relented, and Day of the Outlaw became one of the first Westerns to refuse a traditional ending. No hero riding into the sunset, no community restored. Just silence and snow, and the terrible knowledge and the terror that some stories don't resolve, they just stop. Robert Ryan brought a flask to set every day, but he never drank from it. Cast members noticed him pulling it out between takes, unscrewing the cap, then putting it away without taking a sip. Finally, someone asked what he was doing. Ryan smiled and said, "Reminding myself what Blaze would want, but can't have." His character was supposed to be a man barely holding on to control, someone who'd made too many wrong choices and was drowning in the consequences. Ryan decided that Blaze was probably an alcoholic, or close to it, someone who used whiskey to numb the guilt. But he never showed it explicitly, never played drunk or even tipsy. Instead, he played a man white-knuckling his way through sobriety, and the flask was his private method acting tool. He'd hold it, feel the weight, then put it away, channeling that frustration and self-denial into his performance. Detoth never knew about the flask until years later when Ryan mentioned it in an interview. But watching the film now, you can see it. There's a tightness to Ryan's performance, a clenched jaw restraint that feels like a man fighting himself as much as his enemies. The cold wasn't just outside, it was inside him, too. Burl Ives wore a real Civil War-era cavalry coat throughout filming, not a costume department replica. A military historian had sold it to the production for cheap, claiming it had belonged to a Union officer who died at Shiloh. When Ives put it on for the first fitting, something changed in his posture. He stood differently, moved differently, and when the wardrobe supervisor asked if he wanted a lighter backup for between takes, Ives refused. He said he'd wear it the entire shoot. The coat was heavy, thick wool that weighed over 10 pounds, and it retained cold like a freezer, pulling the temperature deep into the fibers and holding it there against the body. Most actors would have swapped it for something warmer during breaks, anything to stop the shivering. But Ives said the weight helped him stay in character. Captain Brune was a man carrying wounds, carrying command, carrying the knowledge that he was dying from a bullet lodged near his spine. The coat became a physical manifestation of all that burden, something he couldn't take off even if he wanted to. It also had bullet holes in it, real ones from the war, small tears in the fabric with burn marks around the edges. Ives would sometimes run his fingers over them between takes, silent, lost in thought, tracing the path of violence that had happened nearly a century before. The crew started calling him Captain, even when cameras weren't rolling, because he never quite left the role. He'd respond to it, turn his head when someone said it, acknowledge commands. One night, after a particularly brutal day of shooting, Ives sat by a fire in full costume, still wearing the coat, staring into the flames. Someone asked if he was okay. He didn't answer. He just sat there, becoming the man he was playing, a soldier at the end of everything, with nowhere left to go but deeper into the cold. The film's score was almost entirely absent, and that was a fight Detoth barely won. The studio wanted a traditional Western soundtrack, sweeping strings, heroic brass, triumphant horns, music that told the audience exactly how to feel at every moment. The kind of score that announces heroes and villains, that swells during confrontations and softens during tender moments. But Detoth insisted on near silence. He wanted wind howling through broken buildings, footsteps crunching in snow, the creak of frozen leather, the sound of breathing in frozen air turning to vapor. He wanted audiences to hear what the characters heard, nothing but the cold. The composer, Alexander Courage, understood immediately. He wrote a minimal score, just sparse, low notes that felt more like dread than music, sounds that crept in like frostbite rather than announced themselves. When the studio heard it, they panicked. They called emergency meetings. They said audiences would be bored, that silence doesn't sell tickets, that people expected music in their movies. Detoth didn't argue. He just screened the film for them without any score at all, just raw sound, wind and footsteps and nothing else, and the room fell completely quiet. After it ended, no one spoke for a full minute. The silence in the screening room matched the silence on screen. Finally, one executive broke the tension and said, "It's disturbing." Detoth smiled. Good. They let him keep most of the silence, adding Courage's minimal score only in a few key moments, transitions, the final ride into the mountains. The result was a Western that sounded like no other. No triumphant themes, no emotional manipulation, no orchestra telling you this is sad or this is heroic. Just the cold, indifferent noise of a world that doesn't care if you live or die. And that silence, that emptiness, it became the film's most powerful weapon. Day of the Outlaw was released as part of a double feature with another Western, and it was buried beneath the other film on every poster. The studio had so little faith in it, they didn't even give it top billing in its own release. But something strange happened in theaters. Audiences came for the main feature, and stayed for Day of the Outlaw. Word spread quietly. People started telling friends, "You have to see the second one, the cold one." Critics who'd initially dismissed it started writing second reviews, revising their opinions. A few theaters even flipped the billing, putting Day of the Outlaw first. It didn't become a hit, not by 1959 standards, but it became something else. A whisper, a rumor, a film that people sought out. Over the years, it found its audience slowly, through repertory screenings, through late-night television broadcasts, through film students discovering it in archives. It never had a moment. It just accumulated believers, one frozen frame at a time. And now, decades later, it's considered one of the great unsung westerns, proof that sometimes the films the studios abandon are the ones that refuse to die. There's a scene where Blaze confronts Brune in the snow, and Robert Ryan improvised the entire exchange. The script had them trading threats, typical Western posturing, the kind of dialogue that shows up in a dozen other films. Hard men saying hard things, squaring off before violence. But when de Toth called action, Ryan just stood there, silent, staring at Ives. No words, no movement, no reaching for a gun. Just two men looking at each other, breath visible in the freezing air, each waiting for the other to blink. Ives, staying in character, didn't break. He stared back, and the moment stretched. 5 seconds, 10, 20. The crew thought something was wrong, that Ryan had forgotten his lines, or that the cold had finally broken him. Someone moved to call cut, but de Toth raised his hand, stopping them. He watched, fascinated, and let the camera keep rolling. The silence became unbearable. You could hear the wind, the creak of leather, the sound of snow under boots. Finally, Ryan spoke, but not the scripted dialogue. He said something quiet, almost a whisper, something about how men like them never get out. They just pick where they fall. Ives nodded once, barely visible, a tiny acknowledgement that said more than words ever could. And the scene ended. De Toth kept it. He told the editor not to touch it, not to trim a single second of that silence. He said later it was the most honest moment in the film. Two actors understanding their characters so deeply they didn't need a script, didn't need direction, didn't need anything manufactured. They just needed the cold and the silence and the truth. Sometimes the best performances happen when you stop performing and just let the moment breathe. The film was almost entirely forgotten until the French New Wave directors discovered it in the 1960s. Critics in France, particularly those writing for Cahiers du Cinéma, stumbled across Day of the Outlaw and recognized something radical. They called it existential, nihilistic, a Western that understood Camus better than Hollywood. Jean-Luc Godard reportedly screened it multiple times, fascinated by how de Toth used landscape as character and silence as dialogue. The French critics wrote essays comparing it to European art cinema, arguing it was more honest about violence and morality than any American Western before it. Their enthusiasm slowly filtered back to the United States, where a new generation of film students began seeking it out. By the 1970s, Day of the Outlaw had been reclaimed, not as a commercial success, but as an artistic achievement, a film that was ahead of its time and paid the price for it. De Toth, who'd moved on to other projects and never quite escaped the margins of Hollywood, was bemused by the attention. He said he'd just made the film he wanted to make, cold and mean and true. The fact that people eventually understood it, that was someone else's miracle. André de Toth never made another Western after Day of the Outlaw. He'd directed several before it, solid genre entries that followed the rules. Films like Springfield Rifle and The Stranger Wore a Gun. Competent, professional, forgettable. They paid the bills and kept him working. But after freezing in Oregon, after pushing his cast to the edge, after creating something that studios didn't understand and audiences weren't ready for, he walked away from the genre entirely. He made crime films, thrillers, war movies, even a few television episodes, but never returned to the West. When asked why in a 1970s interview, he said simply, "I already said what I needed to say." And maybe he had. Because Day of the Outlaw wasn't just a Western, it was an obituary for the genre as it existed, a film that stripped away the mythology and left only the brutal arithmetic of survival. Heroes didn't save the day. Justice didn't prevail. The good guys didn't win because there were no good guys, just people trying not to freeze to death in a world that didn't care about their stories. De Toth took the Western into the snow and left it there to die, and he never looked back. The genre would continue, would evolve, would find new voices and new myths to tell. Clint Eastwood would deconstruct it differently. Sam Peckinpah would make it bloodier. The Coen brothers would make it bleaker, but with more irony. But for one director, one film was enough. He'd shown what happened when you took away the warmth, the hope, the comforting lie that the West was ever anything but cold. And after that, what else was there to say? There's a persistent rumor that actual frostbite cases from the production were never officially reported. Several crew members supposedly developed mild cases, and at least 2 actors had numbness in their fingers that lasted weeks after filming wrapped. But because the production was already over budget and behind schedule, DeToth allegedly told everyone to keep quiet, promising to cover medical costs out of his own pocket if they didn't file insurance claims. Whether this is true remains unclear. No one involved ever confirmed it publicly. But cast and crew who worked on Day of the Outlaw rarely spoke warmly about the experience. They respected the film, admired what they'd accomplished, but nobody said they'd want to do it again. Robert Ryan later joked that he'd rather play Macbeth in a furnace than do another winter western. Burl Ives supposedly told friends he had nightmares about snow for months afterward. And DeToth, he just moved on, carrying the film like that Civil War coat, heavy with holes, impossible to forget. Day of the Outlaw demanded something from everyone who touched it, and it took pieces they never got back.